Across the centuries, there have been a number of execution methods which became infamous for their use. In England, there was hanging, drawing, and quartering, performed upon traitors, and this multi-step execution method was known to have been particularly harrowing. But executions in Britain remained into the 20th century, and the final woman who was executed in the nation was Ruth Ellis. She was hanged by the executioner Albert Pierrepoint, and Ruth's execution left a profound effect upon him. She was executed on the 13th of July 1955, and many consider that she was actually a victim. There were many calls to abolish the death penalty following her execution, but the final woman, who was executed inside of Spain, was a lady named Pilar Prades, who was executed on the 19th of May 1959. But what was particularly shocking was the nature of Prades' execution, and she was condemned using an execution device known as the garrote, which was particularly brutal and barbaric. Pilar Prades was born in 1928, and her family moved to Valencia when she was a teenager. As a young woman, she was introverted and she could not read or write, and her family moved a number of times to different areas. But she took a job in 1954 working for a man named Enrique Villanova and a woman named Adela Pascula. Pilar Prades worked for a married couple, and in particular she was helping out in their farmhouse as well as helping them run their shop. People came and purchased goods, but no one would have known what Prades would do one day and what she was capable of, and she was considered by some rather joyous and positive. But then Adela, the wife of the household, became very sick, and some said she had contracted a serious bout of flu, and this over time got considerably worse, and she then died. But after the death of his wife, Enrique Villanova ousted Pilar Prades from the house and her work, and he left as he was heartbroken. Pilar then worked inside of a house of a military doctor and his wife. He was called Manuel Bergengauer, and Prades was recommended. However, the cook then inside of the household became very sick. After this, she was then taken to hospital. The doctor's wife also got sick, and the doctors realised that this could be much more than a simple flu outbreak or a bout of food poisoning. The doctors tested for traces of poison, and it was confirmed that the household had been poisoned. Suspicion quickly fell upon Prades, who had previous with members of the household being sick, and this happened to the woman who she previously worked for inside of the house. But there had been complaints lodged against Pilar, and to confirm of poisoning death, the dead body of Adela Pascula was then dug up and was exhumed, and scientists and doctors tested her body for poisoning. In her remains were traces of arsenic, meaning she did not die of the flu, but instead she was murdered. At the time, the evidence was just circumstantial, and it was hard to link the murderer to the crime. However, Pilar Prades was arrested, and she was held for days on end. She was starved for 36 hours inside of her imprisonment, and was also subjected to a rough ordeal, as she was prevented from sleeping in an attempt to make sure they could find out what had happened during the murder and the poisoning plots. Prades then confessed of the poisoning plot, and this was considered very serious. Throughout history, there were a number of accounts of poisoning that resulted in the execution, and in particular, a very brutal execution of the condemned person accused of the poisoning. During the reign of Henry VIII, Bishop John Fisher was subjected to a poisoning plot, and the notorious Tudor king even changed the laws of his nation to ensure that a brutal execution method was inflicted. The cook of John Fisher, Richard Roos, was arrested and tortured on the rack, and he was then executed by being boiled alive in front of a huge crowd. One witness of this execution method claimed that he roared mighty loud, and divers women who were big with child did feel sick at the sight of what they saw, and were carried away half dead. And other men and women did not seem frightened by the boiling alive, but would prefer to see the headsman at his work. So this cook was lowered in and out of a boiling pot until he was killed. However, Pilar Prades was then further linked to the execution and crimes because there was a flask of arsenic-based ant killer found amongst her possessions where she lived, and this was then said to have been the specific poison that was used. But Prades then pled not guilty to the crime, and this was against the advice of her legal team, who believed that if she did admit to her crimes, then she would escape the death penalty. But because she pled not guilty, the trial went ahead, and she was then proven guilty and was sentenced to death. During her imprisonment inside of a Spanish jail, Pilar Prades was subjected to good treatment, and the guards did respect her. She also every morning helped the matron during her duties, and she was allowed to eat outside in the gardens and courtyard when it was sunny and warm. She seemed in prison to be relaxed and happy. However, this would not prevent her execution. Pilar Prades, specifically, was to be executed using a horrific method of the garrote. A garrote was a weapon which has been used in the military. However, it was sometimes a ligature made of chain, wire or rope, and this was used to strangle someone. In Spain, though, it was used to execute criminals, and they developed a garroting machine which was used to execute serious criminals. Someone would be sat on a stool, and their neck was then secured in place, and the garrote was then turned, and this was a spike that either severed the spinal cord as it turned into the neck or the condemned, or it was a collar that tightened and then it got even tighter and choked the condemned. The executioner appointed to carry out the execution of Pilar Prades was Antonio Lopez Guerrera, and on the 19th of July 1959, he arrived at the prison to execute her. On the day of her execution, Pilar waited patiently. She may have believed that she would be given a last-minute pardon and that she would then be sentenced to time imprisonment. A close friend remained with her and kept her company during her final moments, but no such pardon would arrive. There was a crowd gathered to watch her execution, including her judge, lawyers, prosecutor and governors, as well as prison staff. But the governor had to then be relieved as he got so nervous before the execution. The pardon did not arrive, and a number of the men then broke out in tears as they were horrified by the vision of a woman going to the garrote. When the time for the execution came, the guards, the executioner, and only Pilar were there. As she faced her scaffold and the execution machine, Pilar lost her calmness and she pleaded for her life and for mercy, but she would not get any. The executioner, it's believed, even got drunk so he could perform this. But when she was strapped to the garrote, he prepared everything and then secured the collar around her neck. The executioner then quickly turned the handles and the blades, then inserted into her neck and severed her spinal cord, immediately executing her. It was a brutal death for a woman to suffer, and Pilar Prades was just in her early 30s when she was executed on the device. It's not known for certain what drove Pilar Prades to murder people by poisoning. It may have been financial gain or power, as she believed she would be taking out a woman, becoming favourable in the house owner's affections, and then she would become the woman of the household. She may have also been motivated by lust, or a desire to be looked after as she had a difficult childhood. However, inside of the Spanish prison, she was executed, and she is remembered in history to have been the final woman to be executed using the garrote, an execution method and device known for its brutality. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.